Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of Spider-Man Commander deck techs. Spider-Man has a huge number of legendary creatures, so I wanted to showcase some of the coolest commander options among them. I'm releasing a new Spider-Man Commander deck every Thursday through mid-November when the Avatar set drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. If you have a request then, for a specific Spider-Man Commander you'd like to see me build, let me know in the comments below. Shout out to the commenter who requested that today our commander be Norman Osborn. The charismatic head of Oscorp, Norman is a ruthless, obsessive man who's shown he'll stop at nothing to amass more wealth and power. The source of his mania varies based on which origin story we select, but it's always present and always strong. Still, Norman is not without his virtues, even though he puts them to nefarious purposes. I'm excited to show you how I built a deck around him, but first, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why they're cool and why I put them in the command zone. So whatever they want me to do, I'm going to put 30 cards toward that. That's my game plan. It's what we try to do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of these categories of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction. I will usually run 1 or 2 sweepers because I want to be able to clear the board just in case it's necessary. Sometimes I run more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes none. But I almost always keep to my floor of 38 lands so I can make sure I hit my land drops and I can play the game. So let's talk about our commander. Norman Osborn is a modal double face card. We can cast it for its front side cost or its backside cost while it's in our hand or in the command zone. We can also transform the front side into the backside by paying the same cost that the backside costs. Pretty nice. But what does it do? On the front, Norman Osborn is a 1/1 legendary human scientist villain for 1 and a blue. He can't be blocked, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, he connives. Connive is a mechanic that means we draw a card and then we discard a card, and if the card we discarded was not a land, we put a +1/+1 counter on Norman. So a little bit of card selection, and also there's a wrinkle to the connive mechanic. If an ability would cause a creature to connive, and before that ability resolves, the creature is removed, the creature still connives, which means we still draw and discard. It's just there's nothing in play to get a 1/1 counter if we discard a non-land. So Norman is a 1/1 that can't be blocked and connives when he hits. And then for 1, a blue, a black, and a red, we can transform him or just cast the backside for that while it's in our hand, the command zone, and we get the Green Goblin. Green Goblin is a 3/3 legendary goblin human villain with flying and menace, so not quite as evasive as unblockable, but still pretty evasive. It says spells we cast from our graveyard cost 2 generic mana less to cast, pretty great, and it has an ability called Goblin Formula, which gives each non-land card in our graveyard Mayhem, with its Mayhem cost equal to its mana cost. So Mayhem is a new mechanic. It means that we can cast cards from our graveyard for their Mayhem cost if we discarded them this turn, but timing rules still apply. What that means is if we were to discard a creature this turn, we can cast it for its Mayhem cost, which of course is its mana cost, but we have to do so at sorcery speed because creatures can only be cast at sorcery speed. However, we'd be paying 2 generic mana less for it because it's in our graveyard. So there's a cool play pattern where we attack with Norman on the front, he can't be blocked, and he will connive, which means we'll draw and discard. Then we transform Norman in our second main phase, and now that card we discarded has Mayhem, and we can cast it from our graveyard for that Mayhem cost reduced by 2. Pretty neat. So I'm glad that they made Norman Osborn into the face of the new Mayhem mechanic. This is a fixed version of the older mechanic called Madness, which is kind of strange considering this character. Of all the cartoon villains I can think of, the Green Goblin is the best example of someone who's framed as a threat simply because they're crazy. This is obviously problematic thinking, so it's a relief to see him spreading mayhem rather than madness. That said, it's been said that there is no great genius without some touch of madness. Paraphrasing Aristotle, or is it Seneca, is just the kind of thing comic writers do when they're presenting a villain with this level of 4-color shallowness. It's what was needed when the character was created, and every iteration of it since then has at least tried to give us a better justification of his insanity. An experimental formula, the death of his wife, an arcane ritual. But as silly and scene-stealing as Norman and his goblin have been, They've also been involved in some of the most dramatic moments in Spider-Man's history. He dresses up like a green monster man and flies around throwing exploding pumpkins. And innocents pay the price. Unchecked, his inner chaos becomes outer destruction. No rationalization of Norman's character can get away from the fact that he's not just a villain, he's a bad guy. That's how this deck plays. On the surface, we have a funny little antagonist in our command zone. We do the cackle when we introduce our deck, smile as our friends do the Willem Dafoe voice in response, but soon we show our true colors, and unfortunately for the table, those colors are Grixis. We're a blue deck, so our card advantage and selection are peerless, and our hand stays full no matter how we empty it. We're a black deck, so we're constantly discarding cards to fill our graveyard, then using Norman's backside to discount and cast those cards. Most of all, we're a red deck, so we get value from our mayhem beyond just the spells themselves. Tokens, pump, mass damage, mass debuff, and more. If Norman is still an unblockable scientist, we have cards to keep him safe and make him more dangerous, as well as cards that can pull themselves out of our yard while we await his mayhem. And when he dons the mask, we have ways to keep him evasive, cycle our spells through our bin and into play, and otherwise terrorize our opponents as we lob bomb after bomb. We are brutal and single-minded, caring as little for our opponent's threats as we do our cards in hand. Our commander is cheap to recast and transform again, so escaping the nightmare is a dream in itself. Nothing in our graveyard can be trusted to stay buried, and nothing that hits our board is so vital that our game plan will crumble if we lose it. We are unpredictable and unrelenting, and when, at last, our foes are at our feet and we're looming over them like a grinning maniac on a hovering glider, they'll look up into our wild, darting eyes and feel like maybe they, too, can sense a little touch of our madness. You'll enjoy this deck if you like feeling like you never run out of things to do, or if your cards changing zones multiple times makes you feel like a mad scientist operating a doomsday device. So as usual, this Moxfield page is linked to the video's description. At the bottom of the deck list, you will see a considering section, a bunch of cards that I thought about including, but chose not to in order to keep my budget and my power level about where I like my decks to be, which is kind of approximately the same as a precon. So if you want to check that out because maybe your budget is bigger, or maybe it's smaller, or maybe you want to focus a little more on one aspect of this deck than others, that's a great place for you to start in the considering section. So we're going to look at the biggest parts of our game plan. As we've discussed, Norman cares about us getting cards in our graveyard so that the backside can cast them for cheaper. So we have fully 30 cards that are discard outlets. These are cards that give us good value in lots of ways, but the reason they're in this section, and the reason I want to go over them first, is because this is how we get our cards into our graveyard. So we're going to start with Bone Shards. Bone Shards is a classic at this point. A single black for a sorcery that has an additional cost of sacrificing a creature or discarding a card. And then it lets us destroy a creature or planeswalker. A 1-mana kill spell that puts something in our graveyard, sounds good to me. Another 1-mana kill spell, or at least damage spell, is Lightning Axe. It's a single red for an instant that says, as an additional cost, we discard a card or we pay 5 generic mana. Maybe late game we're willing to spend 6 mana on this sucker. And it just does 5 damage to a creature. So that won't kill everything the way that Bone Shards will, but it's in red, and we have the ability to cast it without having to lose any of our resources other than to spend mana on it. So it's a good option. Bitter Triumph is next. It is 1 in a black for an instant that says, as an additional cost, we discard a card or pay 3 life, so the easiest one yet. It's just cost 1 more. And we again destroy a creature or planeswalker. Next is a non-removal spell. It's Collector's Vault from Wilds of Eldraine. 2 generic mana for an artifact that says, pay 2 and tap it to draw a card and then discard a card and make a treasure token. So this is really excellent. It lets us pay 2 and tap it. We get to do our looting, our drawing and discarding, which is kind of like we haven't lost any cards because the cards in our graveyard are generally available to us in the form of the Green Goblin, and we get refunded a mana for that in the form of a treasure token. We can either spend it this turn or hang on to it for later. Collector's Vault is great for selection. Demand Answers from Merge at Karlov Manor, also very good. 1 in a red for an instant that says, as an additional cost, we either sacrifice an artifact, it could be that treasure we just made from the Collector's Vault, or discard a card, and then draw 2 cards. So this is an instant speed Tormenting Voice, which is to say it's a Thrill of Possibility, but it has the ability for us to do it without discarding if we don't want to. We can just sacrifice an artifact, which we will have several of. Ghostly Pilferer is next. For 1 and a blue, we get a 2/1 Spirit Rogue that says whenever it becomes tapped, we can pay 2 generic mana, and if we do, we draw a card. Pretty good. I'm sorry, whenever it becomes untapped. So if we attack with it, it's going to become untapped during our next untap step, and we're going to be able to pay 2 mana and get an extra card draw before our draw step. And whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, we draw a card. This is great because that's the command zone as well. And if anyone's, playing madness cards, doing some kind of reanimation shenanigans where they're casting things from their graveyard, anything along those lines, playing things from exile, we get to draw plenty of cards from Ghostly Pilferer. Plus, Ghostly Pilferer is a free discard outlet. By discarding a card, we can make it unblockable, so that's pretty good on its own. Unblockable means it can attack and not be blocked, so it's tapped so that it'll become untapped at the start of our next turn. Next is Grab the Prize from Duskmourn, very scary. 1 and a red for a sorcery that has the additional cost of discarding a card, so discard outlet. It lets us draw 2 cards, similar to Demand Answers before, but if the discarded card wasn't a land, Grab the Prize deals 2 damage to each opponent. So that means if we're discarding a card that we probably want to discard anyway, because we can then cast it from our graveyard using Green Goblin's abilities, we're getting rewarded for that by doing damage to all of our opponents. Next is another one similar to this, Highway Robbery. 1 and a red for sorcery that says you may discard a card or sacrifice a land, so a good late game option, and if you do, you draw 2 cards. So it's another variant on Tormenting Voice. But it also has plot for 1 and a red. What that means is, if we pay its plot cost, 1 and a red, we can then exile it, and it just stays in exile. And then at sorcery speed, on a later turn, we can cast it for free. So we have to do this, the plotting at sorcery speed, and we cast it at sorcery speed on a later turn, but we do so for free. So maybe this is in our opening hand, and on turn 2, we just plot it to put it in the bank. It'll sit in exile until we're ready to cast it on a later turn at sorcery speed. Pretty good. Next is Inti, Seneschal of the Sun. Inti is also 1 and a red. This is a 2/2 legendary human knight with 2 abilities. Whenever we attack, it doesn't say when Inti attacks, it's whenever we attack any of our creatures, we may discard a card. And if we do, we put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature. So it can be any of our creatures that is attacking. And that creature gains trample until end of turn. In addition, whenever we discard 1 or more cards, we exile the top card of our library, and we can play that card until our next end step. So notice, whenever we attack, we discard a card, and whenever we discard a card, we exile the top of one of our library. That first ability triggers the second ability. Inti is great. I also love Key to the City. Key to the City is 2 generic mana for an artifact with 2 abilities. We can tap it and discard a card, and up to 1 target creature can't be blocked this turn. So if we really need the Green Goblin, the backside of Norman, to be unblockable, Key to the City gives it to us. And, of course, lets us discard a card in the process. But also, whenever this artifact becomes untapped, you can pay 2 generic mana and draw a card if you do. Same thing as Ghostly Pilferer. Pretty nice. It's almost like Ghostly Pilferer has the Key to the City. I wonder if there's a connection there. Anyway, next up from Ether Drift is Scrounging Skyray. 1 and a blue for a 1/2 flying fish pirate that says whenever you discard 1 or more cards, put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature. So that's got to be in play for that to trigger, but we're going to be doing a lot of discarding, and getting a 1/2 and just adding a bunch of counters to it sounds pretty good to me. In addition, even though this doesn't give us a discard outlet, it can discard itself because it has cycling for 2 generic mana. Cycling means if we pay this cost while the Skyray is in our hand, we can discard the Skyray, and then we draw a card. Discarding is actually part of the cost. So it is a great way for us to, if Green Goblins face up, pay 2, discard the Skyray, draw a card, and then cast the Skyray for just a single blue because it will have Mayhem. Shadow of the Goblin is next. Excellent card from Norman. 1 and a red for an enchantment that has 2 abilities. Unreliable Visions, which means at the beginning of our first main phase, we discard a card, and if we do, we draw a card. So that happens after our draw step, which means we've drawn for the turn. We can take that card that we drew for the turn and discard it if we want, or any other card in our hand, and then we will replace it by drawing a new card. And then Undying Vengeance. Whenever we play a land or cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, this enchantment deals 1 damage to each opponent. So we will punish our opponents for doing the thing we're going to be doing all game. Every time we cast a spell for its mayhem cost, we are casting a spell from somewhere other than our hand. Playing lands from somewhere other than our hand isn't going to happen that often, but we're going to be able to do it a couple of different ways. You will see. Unstable Experiment is next. This is actually Norman on the art, the Green Goblin through there. For 1 and a blue, we get an instant that says target player draws a card, and then up to 1 target creature we control connives. So overall, this means we draw 2 cards, then discard 1, and if the one we discarded was a non-land, we put a 1/1 counter on the creature we chose as the target when the spell was cast. We do have to choose that target creature when we cast the spell, which means if Unstable Experiment, if we want to cast this and we don't have any creatures in play, then luckily it says up to 1, so we'll just draw a card. But if there is a creature in play when we put Unstable Experiment on the stack, we can target that creature, under our control of course, and we will draw 2 and discard 1, because creatures that are removed when they have a connive trigger on the, or a connive effect on the stack, will still connive. Vohar, Vidalian Desecrator is next. This is a blue and a black for a 1/2 legendary Phyrexian Merfolk wizard with 2 abilities. The first is tap to draw a card and then discard a card. We call this looting. I've mentioned already, I'll just call it looting from now on. Draw and discard is looting. And if you discarded an instant or sorcery this way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And we can pay 2 generic and sacrifice Vohar to get the ability to cast an instant or sorcery from our graveyard this turn, and if that spell would be put into our graveyard, we exile instead, but only as a sorcery can we activate Vohar's ability. So this is essentially give an instant or sorcery in our graveyard flashback with its flashback cost equal to its mana value. Pretty nice to be able to recur this. Next up is Anje's Ravager. Anje's Ravager is 2 and a red for a 3/3 Vampire Berserker that has to attack each combat if able. And when it attacks, we discard our entire hand and draw 3 cards. That seems like it's a bad thing, but being able to discard multiple cards all at once and now cast them all for their mayhem cost with Green Goblin's face up, that's pretty useful. In addition, Anje's Ravager is the 1 card in the deck that actually has Madness, with its Madness cost being 1 and a red. So the way Madness works is it's a little strange. Whenever this card is discarded for any reason, it's not discarded into our graveyard, it's discarded into exile. And when that happens, we have a triggered ability on the stack that lets us cast it for its Madness cost if we want to, and if we don't, we just put it in our graveyard. So that means if we were to discard it to Key to the City, let's say, Anje's Ravager will go to exile rather than the graveyard, and we will have a trigger that lets us cast it for 1 and a red from exile. Now I do want to make mention that there is a special interaction between Madness and Mayhem. Kind of funny, but there is. Madness and Mayhem are not the same thing, and they seem like they shouldn't work together. The reason is because Mayhem only cares about cards having been discarded, and when you discard a card from Madness, it goes into exile first, and then if you don't cast it, it goes to the graveyard. But because of that detour into exile, it should be a new game object. So it wouldn't count as a card that's been discarded, because once it goes to the graveyard, it wasn't discarded from exile. It went from our hand into exile as its discard. So seems like if you discard Anje's Ravager, it'll discard into exile thanks to Madness, and then it'll go to the graveyard if we don't cast it. I mean, if we cast it, obviously it goes to the battlefield. But if we don't cast it, after discarding it into exile, it goes to the graveyard. And it seems like that would mean it doesn't have Mayhem. But according to the rules, that's not the case. There's a special exception carved out in the Madness rules that says after resolving a Madness triggered ability, which is this rule, which is identical to the rule 400.7k, after resolving a Madness triggered ability, if the exiled card wasn't cast and was moved to a public zone, like the graveyard, effects referencing the discarded card can find that object. What this means is, if we discard Angie's Ravager, it will go to exile, and we can cast it for its Madness cost. Probably a good idea to do so. But if we don't want to do so, it will go to the graveyard, and we can find it because it was discarded this turn. It still retains the sort of quality that it was discarded this turn. So we can cast it using Green Goblin's backs, or the Green Goblin, the backside of our commander. For its Mayhem cost will be 2 and a red, but of course discounted by 2, so it'll be a single red. So the nice thing about Madness is if we cast it for its Madness cost, we can cast it ignoring timing restrictions. So if we were to discard a card during our opponent's turn or during our end step, and we discard Angie's Ravager, the Madness ability will trigger and we'll be able to cast it right then at instant speed. But if we don't want to, we can save a little mana, assuming the Green Goblin is face up, by discarding it into exile for Madness and then just moving it to the graveyard because we're not casting it with Madness. It'll go into the graveyard, we can then cast it at sorcery speed with Mayhem for a single red, since this will be its Mayhem cost discounted by 2. All that to say, Angie's Ravager, very nice as a discard outlet. It does have to attack every turn, but that's not that much of a disadvantage. And we've got this nice Madness interaction if we want it. Next we have Frantic Search, just a great card. 2 and a blue for an instant that says draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards and untap up to 3 lands. So in a way, if we start with 2 and a blue available to us, we cast this card for free. We'll just draw 2 and discard 2, so that's Faithless Looting. But it's a free Faithless Looting, assuming we could front the initial mana. And we don't have to untap the same 3 lands that we tapped to cast Frantic Search. So if we have some lands like Temple of the False God or Rakdos Carnarium, the bounce lands, the lands that tap for more than 1 mana each, we might tap fewer lands than we need to cast this, and we still get to untap 3 lands, so we might end up mana positive. And in any case, we're able to take 2 cards and put them in our graveyard, even if they were the 2 cards that we drew, so that we can then use them with Green Goblin. Next is Glinthorn Buccaneer. Classic card for any discard deck. 1 and double red for a 2/4 Minotaur Pirate with haste. It says whenever we discard a card, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So we're going to be pinging our opponents a lot with the Buccaneer. In addition, we can pay 1 and a red and discard a card to draw a card, but only while the Buccaneer is attacking. So if we do that, it's going to be happening during the combat phase. We won't be able to cast that discarded card using Mayhem until the second main phase, but that's alright. So Glinthorn Buccaneer, I believe, is usually better just to not attack with it, hold back and get its pings, because that's a lot more value. But if we have an open field and we're able to attack with it, then sure, why not activate this ability? Or maybe we can make it unblockable some way, or otherwise evasive. Next is Mask of the Schemer. Great card from the new Capenna Commander decks. 2 and a blue for an artifact equipment that equips for 2, and it says whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, it connives X, where X is the number of, or is the amount of damage that the creature dealt to that player. So if our commander does 2 damage, well, Mask of the Schemer is equipped. It's not just going to connive a single time based on its own ability, if it's the front face up. It'll also connive more based on how much damage it did. If it just did 1 damage, it's like an extra connive. But if it does 2 damage to our opponent, we draw 2 and then discard 2. We're not having to draw 1 and discard 1 2 times. So that's even better. We get more card selection that way. Moria Scavenger from the Lord of the Rings Commander decks is next. A 1/4 Orc Rogue for 1, a black and a red. It has Death Touch and Haste. Haste is great because not only can it attack when the turn it comes in, it can also activate its tap ability, which is tap and discard a card to draw a card. And if the discarded card was a creature card, we amass Orcs 1. So that means we either make a 0/0 black Orc army creature token and put a single counter on it, and we know that it's an Orc. Or if we already have an Orc army creature token, we just put a counter on that one. So essentially it just means put a counter on whichever army token you control, and if you don't have one, go ahead and make one first. But that's going to happen every time we use Moria Scavenger's ability. So we'll make a token, and we'll keep making that token bigger and bigger every time we discard creature cards, which we of course can then cast those creature cards using Mayhem, assuming Green Goblin is face up. Next is Prismari Command from Strixhaven. 1, a blue and a red for a command, which is an instant. That means we have 4 options and we choose 2 of them. That's what a command is. It does 2 damage to any target. We have a player draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. We have a player make a treasure token, or we destroy an artifact. Usually, these removal modes are pretty great. They'll come in clutch. And if we don't need more than 1 effect here, we just make ourselves a treasure token. But in this deck, we definitely want to use it when we can to draw 2 and discard 2. And then we get refunded a treasure token, or we get to kill something. In addition, pretty great. Good use of 3 mana. Next, we have another villain from Spider-Man. It's Shriek, Troublemaker. This is a 3/2 legendary mutant villain for 2 and a hybrid Rakdos mana. If you haven't seen hybrid mana before, what that means is this card costs 2 generic mana and either a black or a red. It says at the beginning of your main phase, your first main phase, you may discard a card. When you do, target creature can't block this turn. So this is a free beginning of sort of our turn. You know, after we draw our card, if we discard a card, which we're going to have a card to discard because we just drew one, we get a creature to be unblockable for the rest of the turn. Pretty great. I'm sorry. Target creature can't block this turn. So we choose one of our opponent's creatures, presumably. I guess we could choose our own, but we're probably going to choose an opponent's creature and make it so it can't block this turn. So if our opponent only has 1 creature, then they're not going to be able to block us. If our opponent has a flyer or 2, let's say they have 2 flyers, we can make one of those flyers unable to block. Then we attack with the Green Goblin because it has flying and menace, so it can't be blocked by just 1 creature. Shriek is not like the most powerful ability here, this payoff of discarding, but the discard is pretty good on its own. In addition, Sonic Blast says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, Shriek deals 1 damage to that player. So a little bit more pinging when creatures are dying. This applies even when our opponent's creatures die on other people's turns, or as a result of something that we didn't do. So we get to watch, and we get this little bit of a, it's not quite a Blood Artist trigger, kind of it is, just only their creatures, but still pretty good. Next is the Death of Gwen Stacy, ideal for this deck. For 2 and a black, we have a Saga. It comes in, it gets its first lore counter, and it will get additional lore counters at the start of our pre-combat main phase every turn, and then after it gets its 3rd counter, we will sacrifice it once its trigger has left the stack. So for 2 and a black, the first chapter is we just destroy target creature. So sorcery speed, murder, pretty alright. Second chapter is each player may discard a card, that includes us, and each player who doesn't loses 3 life. So everyone's going to be losing a card or 3 life. We are going to be throwing away a card, if we can, so that we can then cast it later in the turn, using Mayhem. And then exile any number of target players' graveyards. So we probably don't want to exile our graveyard, but shutting off anyone else's graveyards or their flashback, anything like that, seems pretty good. Ultimate Green Goblin is next, I guess from the Ultimate Universe. For a single generic mana and 2 hybrid Rakdos mana, we get a 5/4 legendary Goblin villain, so pretty good above rate creature. That says at the beginning of our upkeep, we discard a card and then create a treasure token. This is pretty nice because it's happening during our upkeep, so we don't have to discard the card that we drew for turn the way that we do with Shriek, which triggers after our draw step. This triggers during the upkeep. So if we have cards in hand, we will have to discard one of them, which is good for us. And even if we don't have cards in hand, we make a treasure token, because it doesn't say during your upkeep, discard a card if you do create a treasure token. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, discard a card, then create a treasure token. We do as much as we can, and we can always create a treasure token. Ultimate Green Goblin also just has Mayhem for 2 and a hybrid Rakdos mana. So what that means is, with our Green Goblin face up, if we discard Ultimate Green Goblin, we can cast it for its Mayhem cost that's printed on it, which is better than the Mayhem cost that Green Goblin gives it, which would be just its casting cost. So with our Commander's Green Goblin side face up, we can cast Ultimate Green Goblin, if we've discarded it this turn, for a single hybrid Rakdos mana. Pretty good. Next is Winter Night Stories from Tarkir Dragonstorm. 2 and a blue for a sorcery that says draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard a creature card. So a lot of the times for us, this is going to be draw 3 cards and discard a creature card. That's great. If we want to discard 2 other cards, we can do that. And if we really want to, we can discard 2 cards, one of which can be a creature or both of which can be creatures. We're allowed to do that. It also has Harmonize for 4 and a blue. Harmonize is a special version of Flashback. It means we can cast Winter Night Stories from our graveyard for its Harmonize cost, and then once we do, we exile it. What's special about Harmonize, as opposed to just Flashback, is that when we cast it, we can tap a creature, a single creature, to reduce its Harmonize cost by up to 4 generic mana. It'll be reduced by whatever creature we tap's power. So if we tap a 3/4 creature as part of this, then that will reduce Harmonize, the Harmonize cost by 3, and it will cost us 1 and a blue to Harmonize it. Then of course, it just goes away. So this is a nice discard outlet, of course, for us, but also it's a great way for us to get more card advantage, and all we have to do is tap down one of our creatures. Or not, just pay the 5. This is worth 5 too. Next up, we have Big Score. Love Big Score from New Capenna originally. 3 and a red for an instant that says, as an additional cost, we discard a card. So there's our discard outlet. And then we draw 2 cards and we make 2 treasures. So we get refunded 2 of our mana, and on top of it being a Tormenting Voice. Pretty good. And it's an instant speed. So on top of it being a Thrill of Possibility. Haha. Next is Cryptcolor Chariot from Aetherdrift. 3 and a black for a vehicle with Menace and Crew 2. That is a 5/5 when it's crewed. And it says whenever we discard 1 or more cards, we create that many tapped 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So Cryptcolor Chariot isn't actually a discard outlet, but it does give us a benefit for discarding cards. So having some 2/2 zombies are pretty nice, especially when we discard a card, we make a zombie, immediately use that zombie, or next turn I suppose, when the zombie's untapped, use it to crew the chariot, and we've got a 5/5 menace creature. Pretty okay with me. Next up is Decaying Time Loop. 3 and a red for an instant that says we discard all the cards in our hand and then draw that many cards. So we wheel. And it has Retrace. Retrace means we can cast this from our graveyard if we discard a land in addition to paying its casting cost. So we discard a land, we pay for it, we can cast Decaying Time Loop from our hand, and then we discard all the cards in our hand and draw that many cards. So that's why it's decaying, because we cast it once. If we had, let's say, 5 cards in hand, we'll just discard all 5 and then draw 5. Then maybe of the ones we drew, we can discard a land. Now we have 4 cards in hand. We retrace, having discarded that land, and we draw 4. So 5, 4, 3, of course, you get how it works. But it's a nice little wheel that we're able to cast multiple times, especially if we have drawn some land from it. And it gives us a way to discard everything in our hand. Lethal Scheme is 2 and double black for an instant that says destroy target creature or planeswalker, and each creature that convoked the spell connives because it has Convoke. Convoke means kind of similarly to Harmonize, but you can use multiple creatures for it. Each creature we tap while casting this spell pays for 1 generic mana of its cost. So that means we can tap up to 2 creatures because we can't reduce the colored mana cost on it. And both of those creatures will reduce its cost, and we'll be able to connive. So we can tap 2 creatures, pay 2 black, blow something up, and both of the creatures that we can vote connive. So each one causes us to draw a card, discard a card, and it gets a counter if the card we discarded for it was not a land. So it's not like they both connive at the same time. We don't draw 2 and then discard 2. It's draw 1 and then discard 1 2 times because it's 2 connive triggers. But yeah. So yeah, Lethal Scheme, very nice for all that. And in addition, if we were to discard Lethal Scheme with the green goblin face up, this is just double black to destroy something. We can't connive it then because we don't have to pay for it. We don't have to pay the generic mana since it's reduced by 2. But yeah, still pretty good. Next up from the Final Fantasy set is Kefka, Court Mage. Kefka is a 4/5 legendary human wizard for 2 of blue, a black, and red that says when it enters or attacks, each player discards a card, and then we draw a card for each card type among cards discarded this way. So if we discard a creature, our opponent to the left discards a land, and our other 2 opponents discard sorceries, then that's 3 different card types, and we get to draw 3 cards. Pretty good. So it's sort of a rummage for us. Rummage is discard and then draw, as opposed to loot, which is draw and then discard. So we'll discard a card, or if we don't have any cards in hand, or if anyone doesn't have any cards in hand, they don't have to discard because they've got nothing to discard. And then we get to draw some cards. This will happen when Kefka comes in and when Kefka attacks. And then, for 8 generic mana, we can make each opponent sacrifice a permanent of their choice. They get to choose, but then Kefka transforms. This is only at sorcery speed, of course. Kefka becomes a 5/7 flying legendary avatar wizard that says whenever an opponent loses life during our turn, we draw that many cards. So Kefka, pretty good on the back. I mean, 5/7 flyer doesn't hurt at all, and this trigger is sweet. But this attack trigger is pretty great on its own. Gives us a lot of card advantage, gives us a discard outlet, makes our opponents have to discard their cards. Kefka works for us both ways. Finally, originally from Theros Beyond Death, we have Ox of Agonis. 3 and double red for a 4/2 Ox that says when it enters, we discard our hand and draw 3 cards. So another one of these kind of baby wheels. But it also has Escape for just double red and exile 8 other cards from our graveyard. Escape means we can cast it from our graveyard if we pay double red and exile 8 other cards in our graveyard. So it seems like we may not want to exile cards from our graveyard because we want to cast them for their madness cost, right? Or mayhem cost, I should say. But cards don't have mayhem if they haven't been discarded this turn. So all the cards we've discarded or otherwise gotten into our graveyard on prior turns are fair game for escape. We just exile those plus double red and the Ox can come back. And when it comes back with a counter on it because it escaped. So it'll be a 5/3. And we get its interest trigger again. So the Ox is pretty good for us. Gives us a great way to discard cards and of course get 3 back. So that covers all of our cards that are outlets for discard. Let's talk now about the payoffs for discarding things. We've seen a few of these, but we're going to see some more. Starting with Memory Worm from the Doctor Who set. 1 and a red for an alien worm with Paradox. Whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, which is to say, when we cast things for their mayhem cost from the graveyard, Memory Worm deals 2 damage to target player. That player discards a card and then draws a card, and then we put a 1/1 counter on this creature. So every time we cast a spell from our graveyard or from the command zone, if we're casting our commander again, whatever we want to do this way, if we cast Anji's Ravager with Madness, we're casting from exile. Any one of these times, we shock an opponent, they have to rummage, so they discard and then draw, and because we've eaten their memory, we get to put a counter on our worm, so the worm gets bigger. Pretty good. We've seen the Scrounging Skyray. It is a payoff for discard because whenever we discard 1 or more cards, we get that many counters on it. Shadow of the Goblin. Whenever we play a land or cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, it pings each opponent. Burning Vengeance is next. For 2 and a red, we get an enchantment that says whenever we cast a spell from our graveyard, it deals 2 damage to any target. So this is not the same as Memory Worm, exactly, because Memory Worm does 2 damage to target player. Burning Vengeance only works when we cast spells from our graveyard, but that 2 damage can be to any target, so we can hit our opponent's creatures with this. If we cast a couple of things from our graveyard, we may be able to do 4 damage, 6 damage, maybe even 8 damage, especially with the discounts we're getting from Green Goblin. But we can certainly hit our opponents with this if we want to, or Planeswalkers. That works too. Next is Faith of the Devoted. Faith of the Devoted is 2 and a black for an enchantment that says whenever we cycle or discard a card, we may pay a single generic mana, and if we do, each opponent loses 2 life and we gain 2 life. So if we've got some extra mana left over, which we very well may because of Green Goblin's discount on our spells, every time we are discarding our cards, we can throw just 1 extra mana on each time to just drain our opponents for 2 each, and we get 2 life. Monument to Endurance is next. Monument to Endurance, a little expensive for a card. We don't have that many expensive cards in this deck. I didn't put Bone Miser in it, for example, because it's like a $23 card, but excellent in this kind of discard deck. For 3 generic mana, we get an artifact that says whenever we discard a card, we choose one of these 3 that has not been chosen this turn. So we draw a card, make a treasure token, or each opponent loses 3 life. Pretty good. This is not exactly like a ping, but kind of like it. We have a bunch of other pingers that we will talk about in a moment. But being able to be rewarded for our discard by drawing a new card or making a treasure, both of those are going to be excellent for us. And even if we're doing this, that's a solid 9 life loss across 3 opponents. Next up is Neardiv, Devious Diver. Neardiv is from Jumpstart 25, so if you've been playing some Foundations Jumpstart, well, play some more and get Neardiv. 2 and a blue for a 2/2 legendary Merfolk Rogue that says when Neardiv becomes tapped, target player mills cards equal to Neardiv's power. So that's not the part we care about in this deck, but still pretty nice being able to make people mill. People hate being milled in Commander generally, so that means Neardiv is going to be kind of annoying, and so therefore maybe removal bait. So maybe our opponents will use their removal spells on Neardiv rather than on something we care about more, like Norman himself. In addition, whenever we cast a spell from our graveyard or activate an ability of a card in our graveyard, we draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on Neardiv. So just drawing a card is pretty good, but that +1/+1 counter also makes the mill bigger. And this is happening whenever we cast a spell from our graveyard, which is what casting a creature with Mayhem is. Secrets of the Dead is pretty simple. 2 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever we cast a spell from our graveyard, we draw a card. So a nice little mirror to Monument of Endurance, and another mirror to Faith of the Devoted. Pretty good card. Next we have Captain Howler, Sea Scourge. Captain Howler is so much fun. 2 a blue and a red for a 5/4 legendary Shark Pirate with Ward, pay 2 generic mana and 2 life. Gotta do both for this ward cost. And whenever we discard 1 or more cards, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn for each card discarded this way. And whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player this turn, we draw a card. So if we have Norman Osborn face up, we discard 2 cards with Captain Howler in play. We can have Norman get +4/+0 because that's +2/+0 for each card we discarded. We discarded 2. And whenever Norman deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. So we can stack that trigger and Norman's Connive trigger so that this trigger resolves first. So it'll look like us drawing 2 cards and discarding 1 for the Connive. So that's pretty alright. We've seen Cryptcaller Chariot, how it gives us tapped 2/2 zombies whenever we discard 1 or more cards. Iraxa, Empress of Mars, also from Doctor Who. 2 and double red for a legendary alien warrior with trample. Iraxa is a 5/4 with Battlecry. Battlecry is an older mechanic that says whenever Iraxa attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+1 until +1/+0 until end of turn rather. And it has Paradox. So whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, we make a 2/2 alien warrior creature token. So getting free aliens whenever we cast spells from somewhere other than our hand, similar to the Cryptcaller Chariot, we get free 2/2 zombies when we discard cards. Bonus tokens are always welcome. Surly Badger Soar is the most expensive card, I think, in the deck, but it's also the cheapest of the cards that do this sort of thing. That's why it's in our deck, just to round out the power that it gives us. 3 and a red for a 3/3 Badger Dinosaur that says, whenever you discard a card, you look at the type of the card. If it was a creature, we get a 1/1 counter on the Badgersaur. If it was a land, we make a treasure token. And if it was a non-creature, non-land, the Badgersaur fights up to 1 target creature we don't control. Up to means we don't have to have it fight if we don't want to. But if we discarded a creature, now the Badgersaur is a 4/4. Then we discard a non-creature, non-land, and the Badgersaur can fight something. Maybe it doesn't die. That's what we want to do with this. We want the Badgersaur to be able to repeatedly remove things, but not to die in the process if we can help it. So yes, being able to discard our lands and make treasures, pretty good way to make it so those lands are sort of like one-time use lands in the form of treasure tokens. Especially making the Badgersaur bigger is pretty good. This is all great. Again, Bone Miser costs twice as much as this, which is why I didn't put it in here. But the Badgersaur is very good. Next up is Archfiend of Ifnir, originally from, I assume, Amonkhet? Maybe Our Devastation? Amonkhet. So, the Archfiend is a 5/4 demon with flying for 3 and double black that says whenever we cycle or discard another card, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control. That means any creatures that are X1s just die whenever we cycle or discard any other card. Just incredibly strong. And then everything else is permanently reduced in its power and toughness with those -1, -1 counters. The Archfiend is a slow but permanent reduction in all power and toughnesses, and therefore kind of a slow board wipe. You will see it later in our Wraths section. Archfiend of Ifnir also has cycling for 2, so we can pay 2 generic mana, discard it, draw a card, and then once we've done that, we've discarded it this turn, so our commander can cast it, gives it Mayhem, and we can cast it for 1 and double black from the commands from the graveyard with Mayhem, which means for the same cost as just casting it, we can first cycle it, then Mayhem it out. It's actually cheaper, in fact. Oh no, that actually works out. It works out to be the same. For the same cost, 2 generic and then 1 black, we can discard it and cast it, and we've also drawn a card in the process. Pretty good. Mizzix Replica Rider is next. Mizzix is 4 and a red for a 4/5 legendary Goblin Wizard with flying. Look at this guy. Or no, Mizzix is a lady, I think. Not really sure. Let me know in the comments what pronouns Mizzix enjoys. Mizzix also says, whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you may pay 1 and a hybrid Izzet mana, so 1 in a blue or 1 in a red. And if you do, you copy that spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy, if of course that spell chooses targets. If the copy is a permanent spell, that permanent gains haste, and at the beginning of the end step, we sacrifice that permanent. So, pretty sweet. If we were to Mayhem out Ultimate Green Goblin, let's say. No, that's not a good example because that's legendary. If we were to Mayhem out Archfiend of Ifnir, let's say, we can pay an extra 1 and an Izzet, which is to say we're Mayheming it out for 2 less, thanks to the Green Goblin anyway. If we go ahead and repay that 2 anyway, and one of those 2 is a blue or a red, we get a second copy of Archfiend of Ifnir, or whatever else we're bringing back. If we are doing it with a non-permanent spell, we can just cast it again, or have a second copy of it on the stack once we've Mayhemmed it out. Mizzix is great for us getting more and more value out of casting things from our graveyard with Mayhem. So, 2 is River Kelpie. 3 and double blue for a 3/3 beast that says whenever this creature or another permanent enters from a graveyard, draw a card. As long as we get a permanent coming in from a graveyard, we're drawing cards. And whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, we draw a card. So that means if we were to cast something for Mayhem, for its Mayhem cost, we're casting a spell from a graveyard, so we draw a card. And if that card was a permanent, it then enters the battlefield, so we draw a second card. So Mayheming out a creature draws us 2 cards with River Kelpie into play. The only card the only creature that wouldn't work for is River Kelpie itself, because it will trigger when it enters, but it won't trigger when we cast it from a graveyard, because this ability only functions while it's on the battlefield. However, it also has Persist, which means when it dies, if it had no 1/1 or -1/-1 counters on it, it comes back with a -1/-1 counter. So when it dies, it will persist, come back as a 2/2, it will enter from a graveyard, and draw us a card. Also worth mentioning, since we're talking about -1/-1 counters, both from the Kelpie and from Archfiend of Ifnir, as a state-based action, if a creature has any -1/-1 counters and +1/+1 counters on it, they cancel each other out. You just remove one of each until it only has one kind of counter on it. So if the River Kelpie persists and it has a -1/-1 counter, then we cast Lethal Scheme to have it connive, and we discard a non-land card and put a 1/1 counter on it. That 1/1 counter just annihilates itself and the -1/-1 counter from the River Kelpie, and so it has no counters on it. Then if it dies again, it will persist again, because that it did not have any -1/-1 counters when it died. So a good way to keep your Kelpie in play if you're able to connive with it. Next, from Throne of Eldraine, it's Sir Conrad, baby. 3 and double black for a 5/4 legendary human knight that has a crazy ability, but we'll go through it. So Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent when one of 3 things happens. Either any other creature dies, or a creature is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves our graveyard. Any of those things happen, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent. So creatures dying, it could happen on our turn, it could happen on anyone else's turn, it could be anyone's creatures, doesn't matter if it's ours or our opponent's. Sir Conrad does 1 damage to every opponent. If any creatures go to the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, if they are milled, if they are discarded, whatever it may be, that could be us discarding cards, Sir Conrad's going to do a damage to each opponent. And then if we're casting our cards for their mayhem cost, they are being cast from a graveyard, so they are leaving our graveyard, so Sir Conrad is going to do that pinging again. Lots of value out of Sir Conrad. He has a reputation for a reason. In addition, for 1 and a black, we can have each player mill a card. We're not going to use that often, but if we get someone really close to death and we have some mana sitting around, and this is the best thing we can use it for, that's not terrible. Finally, we have Flaming Tyrannosaurus, also from Doctor Who. For 5 and double red, we get a 5/5 dinosaur with Menace and with Paradox. Whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, Flaming Tyrannosaurus deals 3 damage to any target, and then we put a 1/1 counter on it. So just by casting spells from our graveyard, from exile, from our command zone, we lightning bolt any target. This can hit players, this can hit planeswalkers, or of course creatures. And then the Tyrannosaurus gets bigger. And when the T-Rex dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. Each opponent. Even if this enters the battlefield and we never get the Paradox trigger off. When it dies, it's going to do 5 damage to each opponent. That's 12.5% of their starting life total. Just saying. Alright, that covers our payoff section. We have a ping section. Ping is what people refer to generally when something does 1 damage to a player or a permanent, or to every player. This is just our section for sort of direct damage. A lot of this is repeatable, so this is a great way for us to get value out of all of the things we're doing, in addition to the value we'd get from just what they do. So we've seen Grab the Prize, when we discard a card, if it wasn't a land, when we discard a card as part of casting this, if it wasn't a land, 2 damage to each opponent. Memory Worm, whenever we cast a spell from somewhere other than our hand, 2 damage to a target player. Shadow of the Goblin, when we play a land or cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, 1 damage to each opponent. Vohar, this is not damage, it's loss of life, but close enough. When we loot with it, we discard an instant or sorcery, every opponent loses 1 life and we gain a life. Burning Vengeance, when we cast a spell from our graveyard, 2 damage to any target. Faith of the Devoted, when we cycle or discard a card, if we pay 1, each opponent loses 2 and we gain 2. Glinthorn Buccaneer, when we discard cards, 1 damage to each opponent. We have not seen Magmakin Artillerist. The Magmakin is 2 and a red for a 1/4 elemental pirate that says when we discard 1 or more cards, It deals that much damage to each opponent. So we've got more pinging going on. And it does 1 damage to each opponent when we cycle it, because it has cycling for 1 and a red. So pretty nice. We've seen Shriek already. Shriek deals 1 damage to a player to an opponent every time one of their creatures die. Sir Conrad, we just went through how it does damage to each opponent, and Flaming Tyrannosaurus, of course, can lightning bolt things whenever we cast a spell from somewhere other than our hand. So that covers our game plan overall. We're going to talk now about our support sections before we go into the cards that are supplementing our game plan. We're going to start with our card advantage section, which I have just shorthanded as draw. We've seen a lot of these, we're going to go through them. Collector's Vault, of course, lets us draw and discard. Demand Answers lets us discard and then draw 2. Ghostly Pilferer lets us draw when it untaps and we pay 2 generic mana. Grab the Prize, just like Demand Answers, is a Tormenting Voice. We're discarding a card, but we're drawing 2. Highway Robbery, another Tormenting Voice. Discarding a card or sacking a land and drawing 2. Inti does not let us draw, but whenever we discard a card, we exile the top card of our library and we can play that until our next end step. So that's card advantage. It gives us access to a card that we can then cast. Key to the City, of course, when it becomes untapped, if we pay 2, we can draw a card. Scrounging Sirey can cycle itself, so that's card draw. Shadow of the Goblin. At the beginning of our first main phase, we discard a card and then we draw a card. Unstable Experiment lets us draw cards both from just drawing and also from conniving. Vohar lets us loot. Looting is part of draw is part of that. Again, looting is not the same thing as actual card advantage because we are gaining a card and then losing a card. But the selection that we get and the fact that discarding cards for us doesn't mean those cards are gone. We have access to them in the graveyard with Green Goblin face up. Means this actually is card advantage. Anje's Ravager has us discard our hand, but then we draw 3 cards. Frantic Search has us draw and then discard, but we untap 3 lands. Glenhorn Buccaneer, when it attacks, we can activate it and discard a card to draw a card. Magmakin Artillerist, of course, can cycle itself. Mask of the Schemer lets us connive when the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player. Monument to Endurance lets us draw a card if we want when we discard a card. Moria Scavenger, again, it's a looter. It's a rummager. We discard a card and then we draw 1. Nirdiv lets us draw a card and put a counter on it when we cast a spell from a graveyard or activate an ability of a card in our graveyard. Prismaria Command can let us draw 2 and then discard 2. Secrets of the Dead draws us a card whenever we cast a spell from the graveyard. Winter Night Stories lets us draw 3 and then we discard 1 or 2. Big Score lets us draw 2 after we discarded 1. Captain Howler, of course, lets us draw cards when the creature we've targeted with his ability deals combat damage to a player. Decaying Time Loop is a wheel where we discard cards and then we draw them. Lethal Scheme gives us the ability for our creatures to connive. Throes of Chaos we haven't seen yet. We're going through it. Throes of Chaos is just really fun in this deck. That's why I included it. There may be better cards, but it's just a good time. For 3 and a red, we have a card that just has 2 keywords on it, Cascade and Retrace. We've already seen Retrace, which means we can cast it again from our graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other costs. But remember, we're casting it from our graveyard. The Green Goblin does not discount all of our mayhem costs. It discounts all the spells we cast from the graveyard. So Retrace is cheaper for us, and it's going to be cheaper every time we retrace it. Cascade just means, all of this to say here, means we flip cards from the top of our library until we find one that costs less than 4. We get to cast that for free if we want to. Otherwise, it will stay in exile, and then every other card we flipped over, we just randomize and put on the bottom of our library. So Throes of Chaos is find the first 1, 2, or 3 mana spell in your library and cast it for free. That's pretty alright, especially when we can retrace this over and over and keep finding those cards. And it's discounted, assuming Green Goblin is face up, to just 1 and a red when we retrace it. We've seen the Archfiend. Archfiend can cycle, so that's drawing a card. From the Catacombs. For 3 and double black, we get a sorcery that says put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control with a corpse counter on it. we take the initiative. If that creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. And it has escape for 3 and double black, and exile 5 other cards from our graveyard. So we've talked about how escape can be discounted by our Green Goblin's ability, and how we can use the other cards in our graveyard that we're not going to be using with Mayhem to fuel the escape. So this is not just grabbing a creature from a graveyard. That means we can reanimate our opponent's creatures, which is to say we're getting a creature back. Maybe one that we could not have Mayhemmed out because we didn't discard it this turn. But also, we're taking the initiative. Now, if you haven't seen the initiative, let's talk about it. The initiative is a mechanic in Commander that works like this. It means while you have the initiative, when you take it and at the start of your upkeep, you venture into the dungeon, into the Undercity, that is. We'll talk about that. But also, if some other player deals combat damage to you, they take the initiative. If you deal combat damage to someone with the initiative, you take the initiative. So that's how the initiative gets passed around at the table. But what does it do? Well, when you take it, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if nobody has taken it from you since you initially took it, you venture into the Undercity. You take a marker, maybe a little die, or other item you may have at the table, and you put it in the first room, which is the secret entrance. Secret entrance is Lay of the Land. Search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. So that is also card advantage. Just by taking the initiative, you're going to go find yourself a basic, put it in your hand, and shuffle. And then every time you would venture into the Undercity, either by taking the initiative again or in your upkeep, if you retain the initiative, you're going to walk your little token through the dungeon. It has to go down every time. So from the secret entrance, you have to either go to the Lost Well or the Forge. And then if you're in the Forge, let's say, you can't go to the stash, you have to go to the arena or the trap and find your way through. And once it's all done, the initiative will still exist. Will still be in initiative. So if you resolve Throne of the Dead 3 and nobody takes the initiative from you, during your next upkeep, you will go back to the secret entrance and you'll Lay of the Land again. So all that to say, yeah, the initiative is a lot going on, but it does move the game along, and it is pretty fun. Plus, like I mentioned, it gives you that extra land drop. So, we were just talking about from the Catacombs. We've seen Kefka. Kefka makes everyone discard a card, but then we draw a card for each card type amongst the ones discarded. Mizzix lets us make copies of spells, which is not drawing cards, but it does give us advantage. Ox of Agonis is a little bit of a wheel, and River Kelpie gives us 2 different ways to draw cards. So lots and lots of card advantage in this deck, especially advantage in the form of drawing and discarding, which normally wouldn't be advantage, but for us it is, because we can use Green Goblin to cast those discarded cards with Mayhem. Next, we're going to talk about our acceleration section. I have just, again, shorthanded it as ramp, but this is all acceleration. Soul Ring, you probably know what Soul Ring does. Costs 1, taps for 2, you want it in your deck. Strike It Rich is really cool in this deck. For a single red, we get a sorcery that just says make a treasure. That's all it does. But it has flashback for 2 and a red, so we can cast it from our graveyard for its flashback cost, and then we exile it. Since we are flashing it back using, if we have Green Goblin face up, we can flash it back for a single red, because it discounts that cast from a graveyard cost by 2 generic mana. So we can pay a red, make a treasure, pay a red to flash it back, make another treasure, and then it's gone forever. But we can also, if we have exiled this, still cast it for its red, if we discard Strike It Rich, we can Mayhem it out for that red, it'll go back to the graveyard, and then we can flash it back that way too. So even just discarding Strike It Rich can be pretty good for us. Arcane Signet is a mana rock. It costs 2 and taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. This is a 2 mana rock. We basically want it in every deck we can play it in, especially one like this that has 3 colors in our commander's color identity. Collector's Vault we've seen, it makes treasures for us. Felwar Stone is another 2-mana rock. It taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So it may be the case that our opponents aren't among them playing lands that can tap for black, red, and blue. But even if this taps for just red and blue, let's say, because none of our opponents are playing black, that's still a 2-mana rock that taps for 2 of our colors. Pretty alright. Monument to Endurance, of course, can make us treasures. Prismari Command can also make us treasures. Ultimate Green Goblin mandatorily makes us treasures at the beginning of our upkeep. Big Score makes us treasures, and Surly Badgesaur can make treasures when we discard a land card. So treasure is not a reliable form of ramp, but that's okay because our commander's backside gives a 2-mana discount to anything we discard. That's going to make up for it in a lot of ways. And we do have some repeatable forms of treasure generation, as well as 3 different rocks that will just stick around and make mana for us. Next is our interaction section, which again I've shorthanded just as removal. So Bone Shards gives us a discard outlet, destroys a creature or planeswalker. Lightning Axe, discard outlet, 5 damage to a creature. Bitter Triumph, destroys a creature or planeswalker. Feed the Swarm. For 1 and a black, it's a sorcery that destroys a creature or enchantment an opponent controls. This is our enchantment removal in the deck. But it causes us to lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. Usually worth it if we're trying to get rid of a scary creature or an enchantment that's worth removing. Yeah, Feed the Swarm is worth it. Spider-Man No More. Just a good card that I have been putting in my my Spider-Man villains decks in this set. So for 1 and a blue, we get an aura that enchants a creature. We will put this on an opponent's creature. It says, enchanted creature is a citizen with base power and toughness 1/1, and it has defender and loses all other abilities. So a 1/1 wall is all the enchanted creature gets to be. That's pretty good. Shuts down our opponent's commander without killing it, so they can't recast it. Pretty alright. Burning Vengeance can do 2 damage to any target. That can be removal. Prismari Command, same thing, 2 damage to any target. Death of Gwen Stacy can destroy a target creature. The Spots Portal, a lot of fun in this deck. 2 and a black for an instant that says put target creature on the bottom of its owner's library, like the worst place it can go. And then we lose 2 life unless we control a villain. So that's fine. We don't mind losing the 2 life to get rid of a creature essentially forever. And if we've got our commander out, and flipped to the back side, it is a villain. Yeah. So being able to use the Spots Portal in that way is great. If we discard the Spots Portal, we can then, using the Green Goblin, mayhem it out for a single black. Then it'll just go back to the graveyard and, yeah, pretty alright. Just seems good. Oh, I should also mention, putting a creature on the bottom of its owner's library, if that creature is a commander, the creature's controller can instead choose for it to go to the command zone. It doesn't automatically get tucked on the bottom of its owner's library just because the Spots Portal says so. That's only for commanders, but it is true for commanders. Lethal Scheme, of course, destroys a creature or planeswalker. The Badgesaur can fight things when we discard non-creature, non-land cards. Kefka can make each opponent sacrifice a permanent of their choice as we transform it. The Tyrannosaurus can lightning bolt things. And finally, Maestro's Confluence is a confluence. Don't know why the card art is not loading there. Very weird. Anyway, 3, a blue, a black, and a red, there we go, for a sorcery that says we choose 3 of these 3 options, and we can choose the same mode more than once if we want to. So we can return target monocolored instant or sorcery from our graveyard to our hand. So we can get instants and sorceries back if we want, as long as they are not multicolored. As you can see in this removal section, not all of these are instant and sorcery, but some of them are, and they are mostly monocolored. Next mode for Maestro's Confluence is target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. So if we want to choose that 3 times, that's -9/-9. That basically kills anything, and it kills indestructible things. And goad each creature target player controls. Goad means that those creatures have to attack each combat that they're able to until our next turn. And when they attack, if there are other valid targets, other valid players at the table, besides us, their controller has to choose those players. Or one of those players. Just can't attack us if they can help it. So Maestro's Confluence, very nice as removal, as recursion, and as protection. And maybe, we kill our opponents with this. It's pretty sweet to be able to say, look, I'm going to be able to goad each creature that a player controls. If we do that 3 times, and we have 3 opponents, then we wait until our next turn, and all of our opponent's creatures should be tapped down if they didn't have Vigilance or get cast on the last turn. Opens it up for us. That covers our removal. Let's look at our Wraths. Sandman's Quicksand is 1 and double black for a sorcery that gives all creatures -2/-2 until end of turn. But if we cast it for its Mayhem cost, creatures our opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. So it's a little bit of a baby Wrath. Just -2/-2. But it has Mayhem inherently. So inherently 4 mana. We can, if we discarded it this turn, and we have the Green Goblin face up, cast this for 1 and a black because it's discounted. Or, if we want to, it kind of works out to be the same thing. If we discarded it, it gets Mayhem with its Mayhem cost equal to its casting cost thanks to the Green Goblin. So we could just pay black. But 1 and a black versus black, it's basically the same thing. No reason for us to pay the 2 black unless that's all we've got. And in that case, we can also just play the 1 and a black. So I just have this in here because it's a little baby Wrath that gives us a benefit for using Mayhem because it only affects our opponent's creatures. And of course, we've seen Archfiend of Ifnir and how it puts -1/-1 counters on all of our opponent's creatures every time we cycle or discard a card. So that covers our support section. We're going to go through a few more categories that are supplemental and ways that we've organized cards that we've already seen. Starting with the Unearthed section. I went back and forth for a long time trying to name this section. There are so many card names and mechanics that all mean, dig up or disinter or unearth. Basically pulling things out of the graveyard and being able to use them again. This is my section of cards that themselves can be cast from the graveyard in various ways. Ironically, and this is why I chose it, none of these cards actually have the Unearth mechanic. So that's my disclaimer. So we've seen Strike It Rich and how it has flashback. We can cast it from the graveyard, and that flashback ability will be discounted if Green Goblin is out, even if we don't use Mayhem to do it. Bulk Up is next. Bulk Up from Foundations is 1 and a red for an instant that doubles target creature's power until end of turn, and then we can flash it back for 4 and double red, or with Green Goblin out for 2 and double red. Bulk Up is in here because we might win with our commander, with just commander damage. We can make our Green Goblin into a 6/3 when it attacks. But remember, if we've attacked with Norman Osborn several times, we've probably connived a few times, so maybe he has several counters on him. Maybe he's gotten up to a 4/4 or a 5/5 on the front, which means those 3 or 4 counters are going to still be on him when we flip him over, and he'll be a 6/6 or a 7/7 on the back. He's still the same card, so it's still the same commander damage, and we can bulk him up. So a 6/6 or a 7/7 becomes a 12/6 or a 14/7, and that might be enough if our opponent's like, yeah, I'm at 12 commander damage. I guess I can take, 4 more or 5 more. Let's say he's got a power of 5. They don't block. We cast Bulk Up. Now it's 10 more, and they've got 22 commander damage and they're dead. Bulk Up can be used for our other creatures, of course, and we can use it twice if we want to because of the flashback. But yeah, pretty nice. We've seen Anje's Ravager, which is the only card with Madness in the deck. Sandman's Quicksand has Mayhem, as does Ultimate Green Goblin. Winter Night Stories has Harmonize. We have not seen Carnage, Crimson Chaos. Carnage is 2, a black and a red, for a 4/3 legendary symbiote villain with trample, and with Mayhem for a red and a black. Carnage says, when it enters, we return a creature card with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, and it attacks each combat of Evil, and when it deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice it. So we get back a small creature, not a huge creature, and that creature has to attack, and once it deals combat damage to a player, we will sacrifice it, but Maybe it's got a pretty good power and toughness. Maybe we're able to attack in such a way that our opponent will block and our creature will live, which means it hasn't dealt combat damage to a player, so we don't have to sacrifice it yet. In any case, Carnage giving us a tiny little bit of extra value on top of having a Mayhem cost, both reducible by the Green Goblin and just inherently. That's a 2-mana 4/3 Trampler. Pretty okay with me. Next we have Chameleon, Master of Disguise. Chameleon is a 2/3 legendary human shapeshifter villain for 3 and a blue that says we may have Chameleon enter as a copy of any creature we control, except his name is Chameleon, Master of Disguise. That means this is a clone that gets around the legend rule, because these creatures will have different names. We can make a second Green Goblin if we want to, or a second Norman Osborn. Maybe our actual commander has flipped into the Goblin, and we want a Norman Osborn as well. Now I want to make mention, clones are not your commander. Your commander is your commander. So if we were to clone our commander, that clone is not going to do commander damage. It'll just be doing regular combat damage. But still worth it if we're willing to pay 4 mana to get a second Norman Osborn, just called Chameleon Master of Disguise, which is therefore an unblockable 1/1 that loots every time, or that connives rather, every time it hits. However, Chameleon also has Mayhem. So if we discard Chameleon and we have Green Goblin out, we can cast it for its Mayhem cost, reduced by 2, so a single blue for a clone. And if we've done that, it means Green Goblin's face up. So we're casting it and we're getting Chameleon as a 1-mana Green Goblin, named Chameleon Master of Disguise. Pretty fun. Decaying Time Loop, of course, has Retrace, as does Throes of Chaos. Find the Catacombs has Escape, as does Ox of Agonis. So all of these cards can be cast again from our graveyard, just not with Unearth, just with their own various mechanics, as a way that is discounted from by our Green Goblin. And we can use these even if our commander's not in play or not flipped either, not backside up, in order to get the value out of these things. I guess I should make mention that Madness isn't actually casting from the graveyard, but it's here because we wanted to call it out just in case. So next is our Recursion section. These are cards that, rather than casting from the graveyard, although 2 of them can, this lets us cast or get other things back from the graveyard. Vohar lets us give an instant or sorcery, essentially flashback until end of turn, by sacrificing it. Carnage reanimates a creature card with mana value 3 or less when it enters. From the Catacombs, reanimates a creature from any graveyard with a corpse counter on it, that is essentially a finality counter. And Maestro's Confluence can get monocolored instants and sorceries back from our graveyard to our hand. We have an equipment section. Equipment in this deck is just things that can supplement probably our commander, but we can put it on multiple things if we want. We've seen Mask of the Schemer and how it lets us connive X, where the equipped creature's damage that it's done to a player is the X. But we also have the Swifties. Swiftfoot Boots is 2 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1 and gives equipped creature hexproof and haste. Haste is fine in this deck. Hexproof is what we want because it protects our Goblin or our Norman Osborn. Whichever way we want to see our commander will be protected. Next is our Evasion section. These are ways to make our commander, particularly, but any of our creatures more evasive, so that we don't have to worry about them being blocked. Inti can grant creature trample. Key to the City can make it completely unblockable, and Shriek can make a creature unable to block, which is a very weak version of Evasion, but it's something. Next, we have some tokens. Token generation in this deck is pretty sweet because it gives us a bunch of extra creatures. Morio Scavenger, as we've seen, can amass Orcs 1. Cryptcaller Chariot and Empress of Mars both make 2/2 creatures. Cryptcaller Chariot, when we discard 1 or more cards, we make that many tapped 2/2 zombies. And Empress of Mars, whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, we make untapped 2/2 red alien warriors. Finally, we have our synergy section, which High-Faced Trickster, this is the only category it's in, and it's just fun in this deck. I put it in because it's a creature, but we could put in something like Leyline of Anticipation or Vidalcan Orrery if we would rather do that. High Fate Trickster from Foundations is cheaper and I think more fun in this deck. It is 3 and a blue for a 4/2 Fairy Wizard with Flash, which means we can cast it at instant speed. It has Flying, and it gives our spells Flash. Rather, it lets us cast them as though they had Flash. What that means is this gets around the fact that Mayhem respects timing restrictions, because it gives us a new permission for us casting our spells. If we were to, at instant speed, somehow discard a card on our opponent's turn, and let's say it's High Fate Trickster. We discard High Fate Trickster while we have the Goblin in play. Well, it is the turn we discarded it, so we can flash it in immediately for 1 and a blue if we want to. And while it's in play, anything else we discard, we can cast the same turn using Mayhem, thanks to the Goblin, at flash speed. So High Fate Trickster is a great sort of like one-off in our deck that changes the texture of how it plays in a fun way. So yeah, I think that's pretty neat. So that covers all of the spells in our deck. As usual, we're going to go through our lands. We're running 19 basics, 5 islands, 5 swamps, 9 mountains, because we're mostly a red deck. If you look at the proportions of the kind of mana we're using in this deck, which I will show you here, we're mostly red, and we're kind of least of all blue. There's 18 cards that are blue. We have a lot more blue mana production than we have blue cards. The reason for that is because our commander's front face is mono blue. So we want to be able to make sure we hit our blue mana sources as early as we can, preferably turn 2. And having 5 islands, we don't really need that many, even though it's a lot less than our mountains. It's or a lot fewer than our mountains, I should say. It works out for us for what we're trying to do. Next, we are running 3 bounce lands, all 3 of our bounce lands. Bounce lands are great because the way they work is they come in tapped, and when they enter, we have to return a land we control to our hand, but they tap for 2 mana. Each one taps for a different 2 colors. Dimir colors, Izzet colors, Rakdos colors. The reason this is great is not only does it mean we get a card back into our hand, a land back into our hand that we can then play next turn if we want to, as our land drops, so we hit our land drops, but also it puts a card in our hand, which means we have more cards we're able to discard thanks to it. If we don't need that land, we could discard it if we need to. If we need to make sure we keep cards in hand, well, we can discard something else and have that land in hand. Not really used for that kind of play pattern in this deck, but yeah, bounce lands are great and helpful for keeping our hand full. We're running 9 lands that can fix our mana. I'll go through them pretty quick. Command Tower is Arcane Signet as a land, if you want to think of it that way. It comes in untapped and adds 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. That's great. An untapped tri-land is perfect for this deck. Even a tapped tri-land is good. Path of Ancestry enters tapped, but it also adds 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. Totally worth it. In addition, if we use that mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. So first thing to note, our commander shares a creature type with itself. If we use this mana to cast our commander, we get the scry. In addition, we have several other humans, villains, and goblins in our deck. So being able to cast any of those with Path of Ancestry's mana and get that scry is pretty nice too. Unfortunately, we only have 1 scientist, but that's okay. Oscorp Industries is, we gotta run this in the Norman Osborn deck. It is another tap land that taps for blue, black, or red, so it's another tapped command tower for us. It says when it enters from a graveyard, we lose 2 life. But how would it enter from a graveyard? Well, this is the only land that itself has Mayhem. Remember, our commander's backside, the Green Goblin, gives our non-land cards Mayhem, but Oscorp Industries has Mayhem on its own. So if we discard it this turn, we can play it as our land drop from the graveyard, of course, at sorcery speed, because that's when you can play lands. So being able to have it come in, and even though it comes in tapped, and maybe if we Mayhem it out, we lose 2 life. That means we did play a card from our graveyard. So some of our other cards will trigger off of that. And in any case, a tapped command tower, still worth it for us. We are running Exotic Orchard because I put this in basically any deck that has at least 3 colors. It's just Felwar Stone on a land, if you want to think of it that way. Comes in untapped, taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. I mean, untapped land that may tap for multiple colors that we need, sounds good to me. We also have Temple of the False God. I know some people don't like this card. I think it's perfect for the kind of decks that I build. It's a soul land. That means it taps for 2 colorless mana, except that we need at least 4 other lands to tap it at all. We can't activate it to make any mana until we have 5 or more lands, including itself. So this means it's a soul land, but it's a slow one. We can't play it early game, but that's still a land drop that gives us 2 mana every time we tap it. As long as we're able to activate it, it's great. It's just not ideal if our opening hand is 2 lands and one of them is Temple of the False God. We also have 4 soft fetches. So Vibrant Cityscape is Evolving Wilds. Tap it, sack it, look for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So that's just Rampant Growth, this effect. And it's the Spider-Man version. Maestro's Theater is very similar. It enters and it sacrifices itself immediately. We don't have to tap it and hold on to it for that reason. When we do sacrifice it, we look for a basic island, swamp, or mountain, put it on the battlefield tapped and shuffle, and then we gain a life. So it's sort of the same thing as Vibrant Cityscape, except it gains us a life, but we can't hold on to it and shuffle if we were to want to by activating it later. It just auto-sacks itself. But pretty good in that case. We're also running Seething Landscape, which is the same in this deck as our Vibrant Cityscape. We can tap it and sacrifice it to Rampant Growth for an island, swamp, or mountain. But also, it just taps for colorless on its own when it comes in. So we've got an untapped land we can tap for mana, or use it to find one of our basics if we need to. And late game, it even has cycling for Grixis mana, which means we pay a blue, a black, and a red, and discard this to draw a card. Sometimes we're going to want to. It's worth doing. Finally, we have Myriad Landscape. I know I've been going out of order, but I'm trying to group these together thematically. Myriad Landscape enters tapped, and it taps for colorless, but we can also pay 2, tap, and sack it to find 2 basics that share a land type. Put them on the battlefield, and then shuffle. So it's sort of a double Rampant Growth, even though we have to find 2 islands, 2 swamps, or 2 mountains. We can't find one of one and one of another type. But even though this comes in tapped, and we have to pay mana and tap and sack it to find tapped basics, this is 1 land drop that we're turning into 2 lands in play. So it is ramp, even if it's slow ramp. And it's in our, the cost of inclusion is so low because it's part of our mana base. Next up, we are running all 3 Pain Lands. Pain Lands, much like the Bounce Lands, are all the same except for the colors they produce. They come in untapped, they tap for colorless, or they can tap for one of 2 colors if we're willing to take a damage for that. So I have found that these fix mana great, even if we're having to take a few damage over the course of a game from our lands. It's worth it. We've got 40 life to play with, and oftentimes we're able to just tap these for colorless mana, so we don't even have to worry about the damage. We're also running Crumbling Necropolis. It's our 1 tri-land because it comes in tapped and taps for all of our colors, so this is essentially another tapped command tower to us. And finally, we have 3 utility lands. I like to run Demolition Field because even though mass land denial is usually frowned upon in Commander, and I think rightly so at most tables, targeted land removal is worth it because sometimes somebody's playing a dangerous card. You don't have to want to just take someone off of their colors by getting rid of their command tower or something along those lines, but maybe someone's running, a Rogue's Passage or a Reliquary Tower, and it really messes up their game plan for you to get rid of that. Or they're running a Glacial Chasm or a Maze of Ith, something that is annoying and that you're not able to get through in another way. So Demolition Field comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap and sack it to destroy a non-basic land an opponent controls. then they get to better than Rampant Growth. Search their library for a basic, put it on the battlefield untapped, and then shuffle. And then we get to do the same. So Demolition Field is great because neither player, our opponent or ourselves, is down a land after it's done resolving. We both have a basic in play, assuming we had a basic left in our library to go fetch. And those basics are untapped. I think it's pretty nice. We're running Reliquary Tower because we've got a lot of card advantage in our deck. It may be the case that our hand gets pretty full. So if it does, we want to make sure that we don't have a maximum hand size. I think that Reliquary Tower coming in untapped, tapping for colorless, and taking away our maximum hand size is pretty good. I do want to make mention that if we don't have Reliquary Tower in play, and we have to go to our cleanup step and discard cards, we cannot then use those cards with Mayhem. Even if we have our High Fae Trickster in play that lets us cast them at flash speed, or, if we're discarding instant spells. The reason is because we are not creating a triggered ability that we can respond to that would give us priority in our cleanup step. Sometimes you can get priority in the cleanup step, but the only way to do that is if there's something for us to respond to. Just discarding those cards is not enough for us to respond to. Unless, of course, I suppose, we discard Anje's Ravager, which will have the Mayhem, or the Madness trigger. Then we have priority, and I guess we could Mayhem some things out at flash speed if we have some. Finally, we have Rogue's Passage. Rogue's Passage comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay for and tap it to make a creature unblockable until end of turn. Our commander's front face has that, but their back face, which is where most of our deck is built around, does not have it. So being able to get in unblockably is pretty good if we're going to win with commander damage, or if we have just a big creature. Maybe our memory worm has grown to enormous sizes, and we just need to get in and not worry about blockers so we can deliver that final bit of damage. That about sums it up. Again, I'm releasing new Spider-Man Commander decks every Thursday through mid-November when the Avatar set drops. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander or deck style, and I'll build it for you. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.